Anne Baxter was an independent spirit throughout her life. A major star and Oscar winner, she defied the typical Hollywood actress stereotype. She refused to simplify herself for others, found trivial conversations dull, yet maintained a stylish, classy, and chic persona until her final days. While at least two of her roles are considered iconic, her life story is even more fascinating. From leaving Hollywood to become a rancher in the Australian outback, to the tragedy of her first husband, and the influence of one of modern America's founding figures on her career, Anne's life was anything but ordinary. This episode is all about her. Anne Baxter was born on May 7, 1923, in Michigan City, Indiana. Like fellow Indiana-born actress Carole Lombard, she came from a wealthy family. Her mother, Catherine Dorothy Baxter, was the daughter of the famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright. Wright spent significant time in Indiana, designing 8 homes in the state and working on several unbuilt projects, as his children had settled near the Lake Michigan dunes. Catherine married Kenneth Stewart Baxter on March 11, 1919, and the couple moved to Michigan City, where Kenneth managed the sheet steel products company before transitioning to sales and public relations for the Frankfurt Distillers Corporation. On January 24, 1920, Catherine gave birth to their first child, James Stewart Baxter, who tragically died in his crib at just 5 months old. The Baxters lived at 916 Pine Street, where Anne was born. In 1929, Kenneth accepted an executive role at Seagram & Sons Company, known for their whiskey brands, prompting the family to move to White Plains and Chappaqua, New York, before settling in Bronxville. After the move, Kenneth and Catherine had a second son, Richard Tobin "Toby" Baxter, in April 1933. Anne was delighted to have a brother, but her joy was short-lived. Toby died of pneumonia shortly after his 3rd birthday, and the couple had no more children. By age 11, Anne had already decided to pursue a career in theater. Her passion for acting was sparked by her first performance in Michigan City at just 3 years old. This was no ordinary home production. Her grandfather, Frank Lloyd Wright, built her a miniature theater, reflecting his excitement over her budding interest in acting. Anne's enthusiasm grew further after attending her first Broadway play in 1933, where she watched the legendary Helen Hayes perform. At 13, Anne made her Broadway debut in Seen But Not Heard, which opened at the Henry Miller Theater on September 17, 1936. The play, a murder mystery set in a dark New England house, featured Anne as one of 3 children involved in the story. Unfortunately, the production lasted only 60 performances. Variety noted, Anne Baxter, a cute kid, and Raymond Rowe really earned such minor plots as are bestowed. Reflecting on this role years later, Anne shared how it influenced her portrayal of Eve Harrington, her most famous film character. She explained, "I modeled Eve after the understudy I had in a Broadway play when I was 13. She actually threatened to finish me off. She was the biggest person I ever saw." From a young age, Anne Baxter's determination was evident. She once told a reporter from the New York Evening Journal, "There is no stopping my ambition. I always like to dramatize things in my life. Acting is not merely fun, it is an earnest career." After seeing Anne perform in Seen But Not Heard, the renowned acting teacher Maria Uspenskaya invited her to join her prestigious drama school. Although Anne found Uspenskaya's rigorous training challenging, it clearly helped her grow as an actress. By the age of 14, Anne was already setting her sights on Hollywood. She managed to secure a screen test with producer David O. Selznick, but he rejected her due to her young age, advising her to return when she was older. Anne was determined to follow his advice. Back in New York, Anne faced the unpredictable nature of Broadway, where success was rare and failure was common. She played Leda Hammond in There's Always a Breeze, which opened on March 2, 1938, at the Windsor Theater, but closed after a short run. One critic quipped, "We could use a good strong sea breeze to blow that place straight out to the ocean." During the summers of 1938 and 1939, Anne performed at the Cape Playhouse in Dennis, Massachusetts, appearing in Susan and God and Spring Meeting. In the fall of 1938, she played Rosalie in Eva Le Gallienne's historical drama Madame Capet, which lasted only 7 performances at the Court Theatre. In August 1939, Anne returned to Hollywood to audition for Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca. Her screen test with Laurence Olivier revealed a noticeable age gap between the two actors. This was unsurprising, as Anne was just 16, while Olivier was in his mid-30s. She didn't get the role, but her test caught the attention of 20th Century Fox, who signed her in February 1940. Ironically, just before leaving for Hollywood, Anne was dismissed from the pre-Broadway tryout of the Philadelphia Story. Katharine Hepburn, the show's star, disliked Anne and had her replaced. Reflecting on this setback, Anne later said, "Best to have failure happen early, wakes up the phoenix bird in you." Anne's 7-year contract with Fox began with a weekly salary of $350, which eventually increased to $3,000. Darryl F. Zanuck, head of Fox, first placed her in the studio school and then loaned her to MGM for a small role in 20 Mule Team, starring Wallace Beery. Anne played Jean Johnson, described as an attractive little desert flower, though the film focused more on borax mining in Death Valley. Beery criticized her for overacting, but Anne adjusted her performance to meet his expectations. Reflecting on this experience, Anne said, "Maybe an actress feels an intense loyalty to her first role. I'd wanted to be in pictures ever since I was 12, though I was fat and pudgy, had broken my nose, and was told to wear glasses, which I never did." In 1940, Anne's only film at Fox was The Great Profile, starring the declining star John Barrymore. She played Mary Maxwell, a playwright who writes a play for Barrymore's character, a fading stage actor. The film was shown as part of a double feature at the Palace Theatre and quickly faded into obscurity, though it later found an audience on late-night television. The following year, Anne graduated from University High School in Los Angeles. Her final apprentice role at Fox was in a remake of Brandon Thomas's farce Charlie's Aunt, starring Jack Benny and Kay Francis. Over the next decade, Anne frequently took on roles originally intended for other Fox stars who were unavailable due to other projects, personal breaks, or suspensions. While being seen as a backup for bigger names wasn't ideal, Anne remained unfazed by the competition. By the time Linda Darnell joined Fox in 1939, the studio's roster soon expanded to include Gene Tierney, Gene Crane, and June Haver. By the late 1940s, Anne was competing with stars like Susan Hayward, Jean Peters, Celeste Holm, and Colleen Gray. Anne Baxter's first major leading role came in 1941 with Swampwater. Set in the Okefenokee Swamp, Anne played Julie opposite Dana Andrews. Despite her efforts to portray a convincing local swamp resident, the film failed to make a strong impression on audiences. Critics noted that even with her costume smeared in mud, she didn't convincingly embody a rural character. Fox later remade the film in 1952 under the title Lure of the Wilderness. Joseph Cotton recommended Anne to Orson Welles for The Magnificent Ambersons. Although Jean Crane had been considered for the role, Fox ultimately loaned Anne to RKO for the project. The film, based on Booth Tarkington's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, struggled at the box office. Unfortunately, much of Anne's performance was cut from the final version at RKO's request. Despite this, the edited film is now highly regarded by critics. Welles's original vision for the film is often said to have surpassed even Citizen Kane, though only Welles's notes provide insight into what was lost. Anne described the rough cut as an absolute masterpiece, but the deleted scenes were permanently discarded by RKO. Bernard Herrmann, the film's celebrated composer, was so angered by the studio's interference that he demanded his name be removed from the credits. Nevertheless, the film received 4 Academy Award nominations that year. Not everyone appreciated the film's visual style. During production, Frank Lloyd Wright, Anne's grandfather, visited the set. While Anne admired the sets as suitably grand, Wright was unimpressed. Welles recalled, "The old man used to visit us all the time and made withering remarks about the sets. I kept saying, 'But Mr. Wright, We agree with you, that's the whole point. But he couldn't get over how awful it was that people ever lived in those kinds of houses. In 1942, Anne appeared in an RKO short film titled How to Be a Star alongside Joseph Cotton, Arlene Francis, Chester Morris, Milton Berle, and Leif Erikson. The segment featured Anne and Cotton having their portraits drawn at Hollywood's Brown Derby restaurant, sparking rumors of a secret romance. However, there was no evidence to support these claims, and it was simply a case of sensationalist journalism, creating a story out of nothing. Nevertheless, Anne Baxter was becoming a recognized figure in Hollywood's social circles. Anne briefly dated fellow Fox actor George Montgomery and was secretly engaged to John Shelton for a few weeks. The studio even tried pairing her with William Ith, a new leading man. In a 1942 interview with Hollywood columnist Sidney Skalski, Anne made a statement that attracted significant attention. She described herself as an easy keep, which she later clarified was cowboy slang for a horse that thrives on eating almost anything. This cryptic remark about her romantic life kept the media intrigued, but ultimately, it reflected her reluctance to settle down at the time. Anne's film career shifted as World War II began. She became one of the most recognizable faces in U.S. war propaganda films of the 1940s. She starred as Nicole Rougeron, a young French woman who had loved Monty Woolley's deceased son in The Pied Piper. Adapted from Nevil Shute's novel about the impact of war in Europe, the film portrayed Anne as a French patriot. Her lively and mature performance fit the role well. Despite its sentimental and somewhat contrived plot, the movie was well received by the Academy, earning nominations for Best Picture, Best Cinematography, and Best Actor for Woolley. In 1943, Anne starred in Crash Dive, her first Technicolor film, playing the love interest of Navy torpedo boat officers Tyrone Power and Dana Andrews. The movie was notable for its special effects, which won an Oscar. Later that year, she was loaned to Paramount for Five Graves to Cairo, directed by Billy Wilder. Set in a war-torn African oasis hotel occupied by Nazis, the film featured an exciting but highly implausible story. Erich von Stroheim played the infamous General Erwin Rommel, the main draw for audiences. Anne played Mouche, a French woman bitter toward the English, who develops a romance with Franchoton's character. Like many during the war, Anne's political views began to take shape. She became a dedicated Republican, drawn to the ideals of Thomas E. Dewey, then governor of New York and a rising star in the party. Dewey was a tough politician, known for taking on New York's criminal underworld, successfully prosecuting notorious mobster Charles "Lucky" Luciano. As a moderate Republican, Dewey garnered support from various Hollywood stars, including Anne, who was one of his most enthusiastic backers. Dewey narrowly lost to Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1944 and later suffered a shocking defeat to Harry S. Truman in 1948, one of the closest and most surprising elections in U.S. history. He eventually supported Dwight D. Eisenhower, who won the presidency in 1952, a leader Anne also admired. Interestingly, despite her admiration for Dewey's fight against organized crime, Anne would later date a man who embodied the very type of criminal Dewey sought to put behind bars. As the war escalated, Anne was initially cast as the lead in The Song of Bernadette, but the role ultimately went to Jennifer Jones, who won an Oscar for her performance. Despite this disappointment, Anne's career was gaining momentum. She was named Star of Tomorrow in the 1943 Motion Picture Herald Survey, a reliable predictor of future Hollywood success. That same year, Anne worked on The North Star, another World War II film. This movie, a tribute to Ukrainian peasants, was created as American pro-Soviet propaganda. After the war, it was awkwardly re-edited and released as Armored Attack, shifting its narrative to an anti-Soviet story about Hungarians resisting the USSR instead of Soviets fighting the Nazis. Produced by Samuel Goldwyn, Anne received top billing over Walter Huston. However, Erich von Stroheim, playing a pompous German general, stole much of the spotlight, though some critics believed Anne deserved greater recognition. In 1944, Anne starred in The Sullivans, a heartfelt film about 5 brothers who died at sea during World War II. By this time, Anne was a familiar face in American propaganda films. Reflecting on this period, she said, "I was getting almost as much mail as Betty Grable. I was our boys' idealized girl next door." Her next project, Guest in the House, was produced by the United Artists and based on the stage play Dear Evelyn. Anne gave a standout performance as a seemingly sweet young woman who subtly sows discord within a household. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times remarked, "She plays the record with so much coyness that anyone shy of a blind man could see that she was up to tricks." Despite her strong performance, the film failed at the box office, which was a devastating blow for Anne. She grew increasingly frustrated with being typecast in innocent roles by Fox. Anne's final film of 1944, Sunday Dinner for a Soldier, featured her as Tessa, the eldest sister in a family living on a houseboat in Florida. The family manages to prepare a special meal for a soldier, played by John Hodiak. Though sentimental, the film was well received by audiences. During production, Anne and Hodiak began dating, and they married on July 7, 1946. In 1945, Anne appeared in only one film, A Royal Scandal. The project was started by Ernst Lubitsch, but completed by Otto Preminger. Anne's role was overshadowed by Tallulah Bankhead's commanding performance as Catherine the Great. During filming, Frank Lloyd Wright visited the set and commented on Bankhead's acting, saying, "Not bad for an old dame." Bankhead overheard the remark and was unimpressed. In a subsequent scene, where she was supposed to lightly tap Anne on the shoulder, Bankhead instead delivered an uppercut that sent me reeling, Anne later recalled. Bankhead then smiled sweetly and retreated to her dressing room. As World War II came to an end, Fox shifted its focus to family-friendly films and musicals. Anne starred as Julie Richards, a charming ranch owner in Smokey. Originally made by Fox in 1933 and later remade in 1966, this Technicolor production was praised for its stunning visuals, including mostly all blue sky, green grass, and a spirited horse. The film was a commercial success, earning $4 million at the box office. Anne's next project was Angel on My Shoulder, a film she worked on while loaned to United Artists. This movie was a follow-up to the successful Here Comes Mr. Jordan in 1941. In it, Claude Rains returned as a devilish character, while Paul Mooney played a judge who takes on the mind and soul of a gangster. By 1946, however, fantasy films like this were considered outdated, and it performed poorly at the box office. One of the major highlights of Anne's career came when she played Sophie MacDonald in the lavish adaptation of William Somerset Maugham's The Razor's Edge, produced by Darryl F. Zanuck. Zanuck struggled to find the right actress for Sophie until a friend suggested Anne during a poolside conversation. Though skeptical, Zanuck allowed director Edmund Goulding to meet her. Goulding was impressed and arranged a screen test, which secured Anne the role. Anne felt her success in the part was due to her own background, as Sophie's Midwestern roots and country club upbringing mirrored her own. The film, a richly produced Technicolor drama, running 146 minutes, featured a star-studded cast, including Tyrone Power, Gene Tierney, Clifton Webb, John Payne, and Herbert Marshall. However, some critics felt the ensemble was miscast. The movie premiered at the Roxy Theater on November 19, 1946, to mixed reviews. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times criticized Anne's portrayal of the tragic fallen woman, saying she fairly wallows in debauchery and poses. In contrast, Howard Barnes of the New York Herald Tribune praised her performance, calling it a sensitive portrayal of Sophie, a woman drowning her grief in Paris bistros. Despite the mixed critical reception, audiences loved the film, which grossed around $5 million. Anne's performance earned her the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in 1946, and her portrayal of Sophie became one of the most iconic performances of the decade. In 1947, Anne's only contribution to 20th Century Fox was narrating the musical Mother Wore Tights, starring Betty Grable and Dan Dailey. At Paramount, she took the lead role in Blaze of Noon, a film about early air transport. While the movie itself was lackluster, her scenes with William Holden brought some energy to the otherwise dull production. The following year, Anne appeared in Homecoming, playing a forgiving wife in a drama that reunited the popular pairing of Clark Gable and Lana Turner. John Hodiak also had a supporting role as a doctor and Gable's associate. Anne then shifted gears with The Luck of the Irish, playing an Irish character in a film that paired her with Tyrone Power for the third time. Power starred as a news reporter torn between his boss's daughter, played by Jane Meadows, and Anne's Irish character. Critics were divided on her performance, with some noting issues with her quaint charm and her attempt at a Midwest Irish brogue. Anne's career at the studio was clearly declining, as shown by her role in The Walls of Jericho. In this film, she played a supporting character, a lawyer who rescues Cornel Wilde's character. Wilde's character is pursued by the alluring Linda Darnell and burdened by his alcoholic wife, played by Anne Dvorak. Although Anne's role was minor, her performance received positive reviews. Under William A. Wellman's direction, Yellow Sky became a gritty western. Gregory Peck and Richard Widmark starred as rival members of a bank-robbing gang who take shelter in an abandoned Arizona town controlled by Anne's character and an elderly man. In another project that year, You're My Everything, Anne replaced Jean Crane, who had to withdraw due to pregnancy. Anne played a Boston woman who marries a dancer and eventually becomes a film star. As the new decade began, Anne hoped for a breakthrough role to revitalize her career. However, her first film of the year, A Ticket to Tomahawk, was more notable for a brief appearance by a then-unknown actress, Marilyn Monroe, than for Anne's performance. Despite this disappointing start, Anne remained optimistic about her prospects. She soon held her own opposite the legendary Bette Davis, who had stepped in to replace Claudette Colbert at the last minute. Anne herself was also a last-minute replacement for Jean Crane, who was again unable to take the role due to pregnancy. At the time, Crane was one of the biggest stars of 1950, and her absence was a significant letdown for producer Darryl F. Zanuck. Reluctantly, Zanuck gave Anne the opportunity, though he doubted her ability to handle the role. He believed Anne, who had spent a decade playing likable supporting characters, lacked the big virtuosity required for the part. However, he was proven completely wrong. Anne delivered a stunning performance in All About Eve, transforming the title character into one of the most brilliant and sinister figures in film history, a character who remains captivating to this day. Zanuck was frustrated about being pressured into giving Marilyn Monroe a role by her persistent agent. He believed Monroe was only suited for comedic roles, but eventually allowed her to take on a small part. On set, Monroe was intimidated by Bette Davis, and during the 11th take of the theater lobby scene, Davis unleashed one of her trademark fiery tirades. Overwhelmed by anxiety and stress, Monroe fled the set and vomited. All About Eve premiered in New York City on October 13, 1950, to critical acclaim. It received a record-breaking 14 nominations at the 23rd Academy Awards, becoming the only film in Oscar history to earn 4 nominations in the female acting categories: Bette Davis and Anne Baxter for Best Actress, Celeste Holm and Thelma Ritter for Best Supporting Actress. The film won 6 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay. Anne Baxter was thrilled with her role, saying, "I was good. I was respected. I had a great part. The script was superb. The actors were perfect and perfectly cast. Even me, and I wasn't always." Bette Davis praised Baxter's performance, noting, "Anne was really playing a double role, one thing on the surface, another underneath. I called it the suite. Her part was more difficult than mine." The success of All About Eve marked the high point of Baxter's career, but finding roles that matched her talent became increasingly challenging. While filming Follow the Sun, Baxter was secretly pregnant, but still delivered an excellent performance as the supportive wife of golfer Ben Hogan, played by Glenn Ford. She gave birth to her daughter Katrina on July 9, 1951. However, her pregnancy caused her to lose the lead role in 20th Century Fox's People Will Talk to Gene Crane, reversing their roles from All About Eve. In 1952, her final year at Fox, Baxter appeared in 3 films. In The Outcasts of Poker Flat, a remake of a Bret Hart story, she played Cal, a long-suffering woman, although Cameron Mitchell stole much of the spotlight. In the domestic comedy My Wife's Best Friend, both Baxter and her co-star MacDonald Carey struggled with comedic timing. Her last Fox film was O. Henry's Full House, where she portrayed Joanna, a desperately ill woman, in the sentimental segment The Last Leaf, alongside Jean Peters as her devoted sister. During this transitional phase in her career, Baxter reflected in Time magazine, "I've been presented as terribly nice, a good actress, wife, and mother. This is wonderful, but it's not interesting, is it?" She expressed a desire to be seen as sexy rather than wholesome, telling a reporter she preferred fan mail that said, "Let me have your bra strap for my memory book." Her marriage to John Hodiak suffered as her career eclipsed his, and they divorced on January 27, 1953. Baxter accused Hodiak of mocking her attempts to resolve their issues and subjecting her to mental cruelty. She received a modest alimony of $1,350 a month for their child, plus $50 a month for a trust fund. Baxter described their relationship as basically incompatible, but later reflected in her memoir, "I had loved John as much, but we eventually congealed in the longest winter in the world daily estrangement. Things unsaid. Even a fight would have warmed us. To my shame, I'd picked one at last in order to unfreeze the word divorce." Baxter, who had struggled to make a significant mark during her time at Fox, became increasingly outspoken. Known for her intelligence, political awareness, and status as the favorite granddaughter of architect Frank Lloyd Wright, she refused to comply with the studio's expectations to shut up and look pretty. Speaking to the Associated Press, she remarked, "I said that most conversation in Hollywood has a boring sameness. It's all shop talk. Nobody talks about anything but the movie business. After working in it all day, it bores me to still go to a dinner party and hear nothing but talk about the recent movies." Free from the constraints of studio contracts, Anne decided to work independently. She signed a 2-film deal with Warner Brothers and was cast in Alfred Hitchcock's I Confess, which was filmed in Quebec. The movie starred Montgomery Clift as a priest caught in a murder investigation, while Anne played a married woman who had once been in love with him before he became a priest. However, the film was dark in tone and did poorly at the box office. Hitchcock was notably unhappy with Anne's casting. In an interview with François Truffaut, he revealed, "I didn't want Anne Baxter for the lead. I wanted Anita Björk, who had played Miss Julie, but Warner Brothers rejected her, sent her back to her fiancé, and informed me by phone that Anne Baxter had been assigned to the role. I met her for the first time a week before filming at the Chateau Frontenac." Comparing Anita Björk to Anne Baxter, wouldn't you say that was quite an awkward substitution? Despite this setback, Anne returned to Hollywood undeterred. Having dyed her hair blonde, she pulled off a publicity stunt that caused a media frenzy. She was seen at a restaurant with her agent, Russell Birdwell, smoking a large Havana cigar, a shocking and unconventional sight for a woman at the time. She claimed to have picked up the habit while in Quebec. The stunt succeeded in grabbing attention, putting her back in the spotlight, and reviving her marketability. In 1953, Anne starred in The Blue Gardenia, a film directed by Fritz Lang. In this melodrama, she played a lonely telephone operator who, after a blind date and heavy drinking, wakes up accused of murder. While some critics focused more on Anne Sothern's return to the screen, the film remains a notable entry in Anne's career and is still worth watching. That same year, Anne replaced Agnes Moorehead in the stage play John Brown's Body, joining a touring production alongside Tyrone Power and Raymond Massey. She stayed with the production for 5 months, and then traveled to Europe to star in Carnival Story for RKO. In this bleak melodrama, she played Willie, a struggling German woman who joins an American carnival touring post-war Munich and falls in love with barker Steve Cochran. Next, she appeared in Bedeviled, her first film in CinemaScope. In this movie, Anne adopted a slimmer look and played Monica Johnson, a nightclub singer caught up in a murder plot. In 1955, Anne moved to Universal and appeared in One Desire. This Western, set in a 1910 Oklahoma oil town, featured Rock Hudson as her romantic interest. The role had initially been intended for Lana Turner, and then for Anne's old rival Jean Crane, who had recently joined Universal, but it ultimately went to Anne. However, the film did little to boost her career. The end of her marriage and her departure from the studio system were meant to be liberating, but neither turned out as she had hoped. After separating from John Hodiak, her most notable romance was with Filippo Autolitano, an Italian-American mobster linked to the Gino crime family. At the time, the family wasn't yet known as the Gambino family and was still led by the infamous Albert Anastasia, former head of Murder, Inc. The relationship was brief, and part of its allure may have been its defiance of her previously strong anti-mafia political beliefs. Tragedy soon struck, plunging her into emotional turmoil. On October 9, 1955, John Hodiak died suddenly of a heart attack at his parents' home in Tarzana, California, shortly after completing the film On the Threshold of Space. His untimely death at the age of 41 was a shock. The following year, Anne sought to secure his $25,000 estate for their daughter, Katrina, but her claim was contested by Hodiak's parents. Anne had the opportunity to return to a stable career for financial security, but she resisted the constraints of long-term studio contracts. She continued to move between studios, turning down offers that promised professional stability. She explained, "They're not for me. I don't want them nor the professional security they contain. I don't want my life to be a calm, steady stream, and that's what it would be if I signed any of those contracts." Instead, she worked on a low-budget film directed by her agent, publicist, and boyfriend, Russell Birdwell. Their relationship was passionate and ambitious, as evidenced by 175 letters from Anne to Birdwell, now preserved at Princeton University Library. Together, they even founded Baxter Birdwell Productions. However, their partnership was short-lived, ending in 1956 when their relationship fell apart. Anne's career saw a major turning point when she took on a prominent role in the remake of The Ten Commandments. This performance became a defining moment in her career and validated her unconventional approach to choosing roles. In Cecil B. DeMille's epic, she portrays Nefertiti, a captivating princess entangled in a power struggle between Yul Brynner as Ramesses and Charlton Heston as Moses. Her elaborate costumes and radiant appearance marked a return to form. While some critics dismissed her portrayal as overly sexualized, the criticism faded when the film began airing on television. Reflecting on her role, Anne remarked, "Nefertiti ruled the glamour arena some 3,200 years ago, and it's surprising how much the ladies of that day knew about the art of stalking a man." The film, celebrated for its spectacular visuals and sets, has become a timeless classic, broadcast every Easter for decades. Anne's performance restored her reputation in Hollywood and highlighted her enduring beauty. She attributed her youthful appearance to simple habits, particularly adequate rest. In 1956, reflecting on her career, Anne said, "I remember asking myself why I wanted to be an actress. I thought I knew for years. It was the challenge, always the challenge. On the screen, it's you up there, and you're asking the audience if you're justifying yourself, if you're interesting enough to hold their attention, if you have a unique identity and the talent to make it worth their while to watch you, wonder about you, and maybe even be won over by you." In 1957, Anne appeared in Three Violent People, a fairly unremarkable Western, where she played a woman with a troubled past who marries Charlton Heston. The role attracted attention when she fell off a wooden horse during a costume fitting with designer Edith Head. Later that year, Anne returned to the stage in Carson McCullers' play, The Square Root of Wonderful. It premiered at the National Theatre on Broadway on September 30, 1957, but closed after just 45 performances. Adding to her misfortunes, her apartment was robbed of $110,000 worth of jewelry during one of the performances. In 1958, Anne was initially cast in the film Too Much, Too Soon, based on Diana Barrymore's life, but she declined the final script and was replaced by Dorothy Malone. Instead, she appeared in Chase, A Crooked Shadow, a modest thriller produced by Douglas Fairbanks Jr. The film had a quiet release at Manhattan's Little Carnegie Theater in early 1958 and quickly faded from public attention. That same year, Anne began working extensively in television. She appeared in Playhouse 90, The Right-Hand Man with Dana Andrews, and Stopover on TV Theater. She spoke highly of television, calling it the greatest entertainment smorgasbord in the world. It dishes out twice-baked beans with caviar. When asked about her work across TV, theater, and film, she said, "I love to work in all mediums. I suppose that might sound greedy, but I'm dedicated to being better than good. Just once in my life, I want to turn in one really fine performance from start to finish." In London, Anne starred in Alec Copple's play, The Joshua Tree, which premiered at the Duke of York Theatre on July 9, 1958, and ran for 3 months. The play, centered on an insurance fraud scheme, received mixed reviews. In 1959, Anne traveled to Australia to film Summer of the 17th Doll, later retitled Season of Passion, alongside John Mills, Ernest Borgnine, and Angela Lansbury. While in Australia, friends tried to introduce her to a local rancher, Randolph Galt, but he was in the Philippines at the time, and Anne soon forgot about him. On April 9, 1959, Anne received a late-night phone call from her mother, informing her that her grandfather, Frank Lloyd Wright, had passed away. Anne had a close relationship with her grandfather, unlike her mother, Catherine Wright Baxter, whose relationship with him was strained. Wright had always supported Anne's work ethic and ambition, and he was proud of her success. After the memorial service, Anne received an unexpected call from someone named Randolph Galt. She eventually realized he was the man she had been meant to meet in Australia. Reflecting on the moment, Anne remarked that Wright's death had brought a stranger from another world into mine. She agreed to meet Randy for dinner. In a 1959 interview with Harvey Earl Wilson, Anne commented, "A marriage is happier when a man is more or less the sun and the woman's in the shadow, and what actress wants to be in the shadows?" However, her perspective changed when she married Randolph Galt, a former Air Force pilot and owner of a large ranch in Australia, on February 18, 1960. After working 5 months on the film Cimarron at MGM, Anne experienced a miscarriage in October 1960. Despite this setback, the couple remained resilient and welcomed a daughter, Melissa, on October 5, 1961. The next month, Randolph officially adopted Katrina, Anne's daughter from a previous relationship. Shortly afterward, the family moved to Australia to settle on Giro Station, a remote 37,000-acre ranch located 150 miles north of Sydney, with the nearest neighbor 10 miles away. The isolation proved challenging for Anne, but she adapted to managing household and ranch duties, a stark contrast to her former life as a Hollywood actress with roots in American high society. She explained, "We make our own electricity. There are no push-button kitchens, no frozen foods. Our groceries come by delivery truck twice a week, along with the mail. I do all the cooking. Help is hard to get in Australia." Drawing from her experiences there, she later wrote the best-selling book, Intermission, A True Story. Cimarron premiered at Radio City Music Hall in February 1961, but was widely criticized as a lackluster remake of the 1931 film, starring Irene Dunne and Richard Dix. That same year, Anne also starred in Mix Me a Person, a slow-paced melodrama filmed in England, where she played a renowned psychiatrist. In 1962, Anne took on the role of Teresina Vidaveri, a Mexican cafe owner in the film A Walk on the Wild Side, where her character's love for Lawrence Harvey's was unreturned. The movie featured an ensemble cast, including Barbara Stanwyck, Capucine, and Jane Fonda. While filming, Anne became pregnant, and she and her husband decided she should deliver the baby in the United States. The family relocated to California, and Anne gave birth to their daughter, Maginelle, on March 11, 1963. During the production of A Walk on the Wild Side, many of her scenes were filmed with her standing behind a counter to conceal her pregnancy. Shortly after Maginelle's birth, Anne and Randolph chose not to return to Australia. Instead, they acquired an 11,000-acre ranch near Grant, New Mexico. They hired Anne's cousin, Eric Lloyd Wright, to design a 3,000-square-foot adobe house near the Zuni Mountains. Despite the new home and stunning surroundings, their marriage began to unravel. Anne did not act in films again for 3 years, making only a short appearance in Jerry Lewis's The Family Jewels in 1965, where she played an actress seen in an in-flight movie. After several television appearances, including a role in the iconic Batman series, Anne starred in Tall Women, a low-budget Spanish Western dubbed into English. The film was widely released in 1967 in U.S. action theater markets. In the slapstick comedy The Busybody, Anne played a glamorous con artist who nearly gets the lead character, played by Sid Caesar, killed. That same year, Anne and her husband separated, prompting her to move back to Hollywood with her daughters to relaunch her career. Reflecting on her past decisions, she said, "I gave up my career because I was very much in love. My husband didn't want me to give it up. I think he was wiser than I was." About her time in Australia, she added, "It's an unpardonable thing to leave." Anne then signed a 3-year television film contract with Universal Studios. Calling herself a stock company of one, she appeared in several made-for-TV films, including Stranger on the Run of Henry Fonda, Companions in Nightmare, Marcus Welby, M.D. playing Myra Sherwood, The Challengers, and Ritual of Evil. She also acted in the TV series The Name of the Game, earning an Emmy nomination for her role in the Bobby Courier story. However, she lost the award to Geraldine Page, who won for The Thanksgiving Visitor. When rumors surfaced that Anne might replace Lauren Bacall in the musical Applause based on All About Eve, Anne addressed the speculation, saying, "Darling, I've always had a voice. I once sang, but my career went in a different direction. I have a voice with range. God knows it projects to the third balcony. I've been shushed all my life." Anne ultimately took on the role of Margot Channing, originally played by Bette Davis. Despite it being her first Broadway musical, Anne's performance was a hit, and she remained in the role until July 27, 1972. Penny Fuller, who played Eve Harrington in the musical, remarked that while Lauren Bacall brought charisma and star power to the role, Anne's performance was defined by her acting skill rather than her persona. In 1974, Anne returned to Broadway in 2 of Noel Coward's one-act plays, Come Into the Garden, Maud, and Song at Twilight, alongside longtime friends Hume Cronin and Jessica Tandy. The plays ran successfully for 140 performances. Reflecting on this stage of her career, Anne described it as her smorgasbord years, adding, "I'm getting ready for my dessert years, which I intend to enjoy like a dieter who's been very, very good, and then digs into a hot fudge sundae, complete with whipped cream and a cherry on top." In a 1975 interview with the Chicago Daily News, Anne spoke openly about the challenges of balancing a career and family life, stating, "Nobody has ever done both at the same time to full satisfaction. Anyone who says she has is lying." On January 30, 1977, Anne married Wall Street banker David Klee, but tragically, he passed away just 10 months later. After his death, Anne kept their Connecticut home, which they had been renovating, and commuted to California for her stage and television work. In 1983, when Bette Davis had to leave the television series Hotel due to illness, Anne Baxter was brought in as her replacement. Within 72 hours, Baxter was back in Hollywood, seamlessly taking on the role much like her character's iconic replacement in All About Eve. Her later years seemed to be shaping up as rewarding as her earlier career, with Baxter aging gracefully and in high demand for compelling roles in both television and film. However, before she could fully cement her status as a revered Hollywood veteran, tragedy struck. On December 4, 1985, while walking down Madison Avenue in New York on her way to a hair appointment, Baxter suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and collapsed. She had paused to hail a taxi, but this would be the final act of her life. She passed away 8 days later at Lenox Hill Hospital at the age of 62, never regaining consciousness. At the time of her death, she had just signed a contract with William Morrow Publishing to write a book about her family's legacy. As per her wishes, her ashes were scattered beneath an apple tree in Spring Green, Wisconsin, near her grandfather's famous Taliesin estate. No funeral was held. Reflecting on her passing, co-star Connie Sellecca said, "I adored her and loved working with her. Her death is a great loss to me personally and a tremendous loss for the show." Charlton Heston added, "The world has lost a remarkable actress and a significant star. Anne was a stimulating actress to work with and a fine woman as well. I will miss her." In interviews, Anne often expressed her philosophy. "I'm an actress, not a personality. It's more successful to be a personality, but can you bring that to every role? I don't spill over into everything I do. I do what I do from inside someone else's skin,